Yo, what's good, everybody? So, we got September 15th. Sergio Martinez, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. for the WBC middleweight title, which is held by Chavez Jr. but really belongs to Sergio Martinez. This is a fight a lot of us been waiting for quite a while now, and we finally got it. Chavez Jr. is coming off a win over Andy Lee, who's a highly regarded middleweight, junior middleweight, and he disposed of him by knockout. And with Sergio Martinez, we've seen this dude really in the last 4 fights has won every fight by knockout, which even for somebody like him who started late in the sport and is around 37 years old, going on 38, he's still somewhat fresh, in a sense. So this is a premier fight at middleweight, which is something we haven't seen in the last several years. So, with Chavez Jr., he's been a guy that obviously has been, handheld through his career. I mean, he's been given fights against tomato cans for the most part, and up until recently has been fighting guys like a Rubio and an Andy Lee and Manfredo, if you want to consider him anything. But for the most part, he hasn't fought necessarily the upper echelon of 154 pounds to 160 pounds. And it's, obviously the way the sport is, man, WBC pretty much handed him the middleweight title on a silver platter. And like I meant, people don't really recognize him as the middleweight champion. And, with Martinez, I mean, he's a guy who is got a lot of speed for a middleweight, really good movement, isn't a conventional boxer, does make mistakes in there, but he's a tough dude, man. I mean, we've seen the fights that he's had with Paul Williams, particularly the first one, and he comes to fight, and he's very unorthodox. Obviously, he's a southpaw as well. So, with Chavez Jr., you got a guy who, similar to his father, maybe not as well, but obviously he's a bigger guy than his father was. He attacks the body really, really well. I mean, that's I think his game. He just, wears you down and breaks you down throughout the fight. But the issue I see in this fight for Chavez Jr. is Chavez Jr. is a guy who comes straight at you, doesn't really give you angles, and he'll take a punch to give a punch. Against Martinez, we've seen guys that have been tailor-made for him and guys that have given him trouble. The fight that Martinez had with Darren Barker was a situation that, Barker was probably an underrated boxer and was giving Martinez issues simply based on the style matchup. But Martinez was able to gather himself and he got the knockout win over Barker, who had never been knocked out prior to that. And with Chavez Jr., you got a guy who has a good chin, but again hasn't faced punchers, hasn't faced really anybody that you consider a big puncher in relation to Sergio Martinez, who has one-punch knockout power, as we've seen. So with this fight, I think the main issue for Chavez is that I believe he's going to think that his size is going to be overbearing on Martinez, because the one issue that a lot of people have had with Chavez Jr. is, he comes in really big fight night, and the whole fact that he hasn't been taking the drug tests after the fight, which seems to get pushed under the rug, so to speak. And he comes in sometimes at close to 180 pounds for a middleweight. So I think he's going to go in there and try to implement his size. But I think the problem he's going to run into is I think he's gonna try to attack the body of Martinez, which would be the key thing to do for a guy who has a lot of movement. It'll slow him down, and he'll be able to catch up to him a little quicker. But Martinez, he has a way of, and you don't see this in a lot of fighters today because it's really a black and white thing. You don't see a lot of fighters that make adjustments. Obviously guys like Floyd Mayweather are, the king of making adjustments mid-fight. Martinez has the ability to do that. I think what Chavez Jr. is going to do is try to attack the body, get close to Martinez, but I think throughout the course of that fight, Martinez is going to be landing punches consistently. Now, if you look at the fights that he had with, particularly Andy Lee, meaning for Chavez Jr., Andy Lee was landing pretty flush on Martinez, on Chavez Jr., but obviously Andy Lee's not a big puncher. But now you got a guy in Martinez who is a big puncher and has speed and has, good movement. I really see Chavez Jr. getting lit up in this fight. I think he'll have his moments where, he'll corner Chavez and maybe, or Martinez, I keep fucking Martinez and trapping him in some parts, but I think Martinez will get out of the way and he'll lure him in, because Martinez isn't necessarily a counter puncher, I would say, but at times he catches you, when you're least expecting it, and he has really good combinations, and this is something that Chavez Jr. up to this point hasn't seen. When you look at the level of competition that Chavez Jr.'s face in relation to Martinez, Chavez Jr.'s like going from here to like here with Martinez, in relation to the guys he's fought before. I mean, it's a big step up in competition, but I think his downfall is going to be he's going to try to chase down Martinez, and Martinez, I think, is going to light him up with combination punches, and we'll see at that point if Chavez Jr. is the real deal, because I mean, if he's to get a win over Sergio Martinez, I have no doubts that Chavez Jr. will be on the map. I mean, and I mean by convincingly beating him, not on some, robbery bullshit, which is something that I think for the case of Martinez, he has to have the performance of his life, because I could see this fight being taken away from him considering the people that are backing Chavez Jr. So my prediction for this fight is I think Sergio Martinez is going to win a unanimous decision. I think Chavez Jr. is going to hang in tough, but I think he's going to be outclassed in this fight. So let me know what you think. September 15th, pay-per-view. I'll be ordering this fight, and I'll do like I usually do with most of the big fights, have a post-fight discussion with the crew, and see what occurs after for both fighters, win or lose. So before I also go, make sure to check out my brand new EP with my man JD Cuellar called Reality Principle. I'll be posting up the link as this video is fading out. Free EP, dope, 7 joints, and just dope hip hop. Nothing else to be explained. Featuring X, Rex from Boston, and download that shit, man. Support. So I will see you September 16th, and like I said, I got Martinez by unanimous decision. Peace.
I was bumping down when he was Derek X. Most rappers is meritless, deuces 85%. Stomp on the grounds, you tippy toe on. Building with legends, ripping the flow strong. Took Pop's whip for a test ride. 96 throw out Cowboys at a Best Buy.